overview of the steps that you can go through to develop early detection capacity on the lands that you either own or manage, and I'm talking about from the local level up to the national level. This is actually one of the 5 seminars that we have developed to provide you this kind of information. We started on January 29th, and we're actually going to finish with the 5th session today at lunchtime for an hour to talk about the steps, strategies for rapid response. To talk about what Cynthia was talking about just a second ago, the pre-border, border, and post-border management strategies. This is a webinar series that Steve and I developed that's based on a workshop we did in 2006 for the Global Invasive Species Program in Tanzania, Africa. And we did that for about 30 port officials from 9 East African countries. So it's really about pest exclusion at national ports of entry based on my experience in the Port of Charleston from 1979 to 86. So what I'm trying to do with this is to make a connection between what happens at a port of entry with a plant quarantine inspector, as I used to be, and the work that we do on the interior of our country to manage invasive species. So these people understand each other. There's rarely a connection between the port inspectors and the folks in for example, in a national park. So this is the 4th in our 9-part series for that webinar. And there's a webinar schedule, as Steve said, on our company website, and we've also recorded about 5 or 6 of these so far, so you can go and look at them. Anyway, I am originally from upstate South Carolina, and started working as a port inspector for APHIS in 1979. That's where I was first introduced to invasive species. And then in 1986 moved up here to the Whiteville Plant Methods Center to help Dr. Bob Epley work in the witchweed eradication program, and it just went from there. So everything that I'm going to tell you today, I really learned in 2 places, at the Port of Charleston and then working on weed eradication programs around the United States. One of my favorite memories is a trip I had in 1999 when Cynthia Bettner invited me to come up to a New England invasive plant summit that they held in June 1999. It was quite an experience. If you look at this picture right up here, you might recognize a few people there. That's actually Les Meerhoff right there. But anyway, that's where I got all wrapped up with Les Meerhoff, and sort of the rest is history. After that meeting was when he really started working to develop iPaint as we know it today. So it was quite an exciting thing to meet everybody up there, and probably some of you were there. So this is a good follow-up on what we were talking about then. Here we are just about 14 years later. So now they say Les has moved on. I think he's probably somewhere. His project now is doing an invasive plant atlas of the universe. Before I start, I want you to write down 2 numbers. I think it's really critical for you. If you're thinking about EDR, I want to give you 2 numbers of why you need to do this and why you need to do it yesterday. First of all, Rod Randall in Western Australia, who's our premier world weed geographer, says he's documented 33,759 species of weeds in the world. Of that total, we have about 1,300 introduced into this country that are causing problems. That means we have about 32,459 left to go. So if you think it's bad now, what do you think it's going to be like in 500 years? Unless we get ahead of this problem and keep these things out. Because if 1,300 species can cause the problems that we have now, imagine what another 10,000 species might cause. That is the whole premise of why, when I retired from the Federal Service last year, I couldn't quit. I couldn't stop doing this work, because it just seems that we really are beginning to get a handle on this problem, and we really need to create defenses, better defenses at the ports of entry for foreign pest exclusion, and early detection rapid response, which is our second line of defense. Anyway, so I've broken this down for early detection rapid response into 3 phases as it's developed since 1957, with the initiation of the witchweed eradication program here in the Carolinas, which I'll talk about in detail at lunchtime if you have time to join us. So to begin with, we had eradication programs that were based either as state or federal noxious weeds. So here is Al Tasker, our buddy in APHIS. He's interested in finding and eradicating new weeds from the entire United States. At the next level down at any state, in particular North Carolina, here's Rick Iverson. He wants to eradicate anything from North Carolina. It doesn't matter what's in Arizona. He's worried about what's in North Carolina. And some examples of these that we worked on back in the early days when I came here in 1986 were goat shrew in Utah, Japanese dodder up at the Clemson University Arboretum. Then in the late 90s is when we really started thinking about an interagency approach to this problem. And the reason that we went to an interagency approach is because these single agency-led programs like witchweed come and go depending on the priorities of the current governor or president that is that's been elected, and the agencies and what their priorities are. I've seen so many things come and go. Example of that is goat shrew, which we started in 1981, and they got $150,000 a year to work on a 40,000-acre infestation. And then the congressional earmark was lifted in 1996, and it's history. So we did all this work, and we probably still have 40,000 acres of goat shrew. So we started thinking in the late 90s with folks like Cynthia and Les Meerhoff that if we had a lot of people working on a problem like this, it would just, one agency could drop out and the whole thing wouldn't fall apart. And that's exactly what we mean by EDRR 2.0. So examples of that are the Delaware Invasive Species Council, which Steve and I helped to establish in August 1998. And last year we did our first early detection rapid response training workshop for them. And then in 2003, we established the Beach Phytex Task Force. That's another example of an interagency approach to early detection rapid response. And as a result, we've almost eradicated all of beach phytex from the South Carolina coast. It could have never been done by one agency in South Carolina. It would have just never happened. And I'll tell you the details if you can join us today for our other webinar. So then when I retired last year, Steve Manning asked me a question that I will never forget. And I guess I'm not really sure why it took me to retire to perceive what I'm going to tell you. But actually it took somebody else who was standing back looking at what I was trying to do at the state and national level. And they said, well, can't you apply these ideas down at the level of the county or the city? Or the biomes or roads or rivers or public land units. So everything that we've tried to do with these interagency programs, we're trying to get people who manage and own lands. So we're talking about a weed management area or in a county or a city or a lake or a river. It doesn't matter. We want them to take responsibility for dealing with new invasive species, because I can tell you the cavalry is not coming. We're having so many troubles now with our budgets at the state and national level that we can't count on there being a big program anymore to take care of these issues for us. So I think that what we really need to do is get people to take responsibility right there where they are. It doesn't matter whether the species on their land is regulated. What we want people to do is say, if Oriental bittersweet shows up on your land for the first time, you're going to get rid of it. We don't need any new weeds in 100 years. So as I said, we have over 30,000 more we can get. And unless something changes, we're going to get them. We'll be dead. We'll be gone. They'll be looking back and saying, you know, they could have done something then. Well, at some point, somebody's going to do something, and I'm telling you, I'd like for it to be our generation. All the way down to your backyard, whether if you have a half acre in your yard or a fourth acre or a 10th acre, it doesn't matter. That's your kingdom. That's your state. That's your county right there. You manage it. You own it. It's yours. You bought it. You built it. So now we want to get people to adopt a land conservation ethic so that they say, no new invaders, period. I can't help what happens to my neighbor, can't help what happens in the next state, but if we all did that, we could get ahead of this problem. So the 7 steps are very simple. Get organized, put more eyes on the ground, do some surveys, manage your field data, tell somebody, assess the problem if you need to, and take action. It's really that simple. So what I'm going to do is go through each of these steps very quickly today so that you can see what I'm talking about. The first thing you need to do is to figure out where your fences are. Are you talking about a farm or a ranch? Are you talking about a city park? Talking about a state park, a national park, a refuge? What is it that you manage? Whenever you figure that out, then you can identify your stakeholders. This is really important. My experience in working with the witchweed eradication program here for all these years is that it was a single agency-led approach, which meant that the stakeholders, who really were the farmers and the landowners, didn't have any role or responsibility in this thing. So what we have found works with the Beach Vitex task force is to have both the impacted stakeholders and the potential stakeholders involved in the discussions all the way. And you get these people together and talk about it, and then they feel like they have some ownership in the issue. And this is exactly what is happening right now here at Lake Waccamaw. Lake Waccamaw is the biggest Carolina Bay on the East Coast. It's 9,000 acres. We now have an infestation of hydrilla to the tune of 600 acres. So when we found that out last fall, we pulled all these people together. We had a public meeting. We talked to the Park Advisory Committee, and we now have a Technical Advisory Committee. And if I have anything to do with it, we're going to have a task force of all these people together. Because you can't just have people to come down here from Raleigh and tell everybody what to do. We need the folks here that are being impacted by this, the boaters, the people that live on the lake, the homeowners. They need to be involved too. So here's where we are in southeastern North Carolina, and there is Lake Waccamaw. We're about 50 miles from the coast. Here's Myrtle Beach down here, and we're actually right up here, just about right there. That's where our research station is. So the next thing you do after you get your folks together is to develop a work plan. And to do that, you need some kind of committee of your stakeholders. And in the case of Lake Waccamaw, we're talking about the state park, the town of Lake Waccamaw, the Wildlife Resources Commission, North Carolina State University, and Southeastern Community College, and Invasive Plant Control, and anybody else that has an issue or an invested interest in Lake Waccamaw. You get those folks together and you figure out what is it that we're trying to protect our particular kingdom from. And in the case of Lake Waccamaw, we're concerned really about several things, including hydrilla, which we have now, crested floating art, which I'll show you some pictures in as we go along here, which is at Lake Marion down in South Carolina, which is one boat ride away from getting here, just like hydrilla, and wild taro, which is actually planted around the lake by people, or elephant ears, and has spread into the park and is now growing down the river. So we're trying to eradicate it. You need to figure out what your high-value natural and managed resources at risk are. And in the case of Lake Waccamaw, that's the Waccamaw silverside minnow, which lives nowhere else in the world except this lake and in the headwaters of the river that runs out of the lake, the Waccamaw River, which goes through the coastal plain down toward Charleston into the ocean. So then you need to figure out what your how you're going to actually monitor these kind of invaders, and so we need to set up an early detection network at Lake Waccamaw. That will be Friends of Parks, boaters, volunteers, Native Plant Society members, agency field personnel from state parks, Wildlife Resources Commission, other folks who are out on that lake. So that's what we're going to do in terms of having training workshops for these members, for the residents and the boaters, to make sure they know that they need to clean their boats. That is the most important thing. And if you see something strange, just call a state park or call the town or call somebody. Don't just, you know, ride by it in your boat. Send these people information. Send out weed alerts. And so here is the area in Lake Waccamaw that's now infested, and it's about 600 acres, and it's going to cost us about $450,000 a year over the next 10 to 15 years, because Wildlife Resources Commission refuses to let us use grass carp. Grass carp, we could do it for probably $50,000 a year, but they said there's too many natural endemic species in this lake, and so we're going to go the chemical route. That's all we can do. But as I'm sitting there and they're saying, no, you can't, I'm trying to think to myself, where were you 5 years ago when we were talking about early detection rapid response at Lake Waccamaw? Now you have the power to say no. Well, now somebody needs to stand up and say, let's have a monitoring program so crested floating hart does not come here. It does not come to White Lake, 30 miles from here, or any other water body in this area. So now I hope today that you get a sense that this is so critical because of what we're really faced in the future if we don't do it. And if you don't do it, you're going to be faced with what we are, which is we have our senators and our congressional and our representatives here in the state, not in Congress, who are coming together this week to figure out where to get $250,000. And that is just making everybody quake. Well, as I'm sitting there listening to that, I'm thinking, and this could have been avoided, and this could have been avoided. So what is coming next? And the same thing is going to happen to you. That is why I would like to see you make this a high priority in all your SISMAs up there, because if you've got some things you're dealing with now, it could be a lot worse. Once you get your network going, then you need to do surveys of your resources. And in the case of Lake Waccamaw, we want to get out on the lake and keep looking and never let something get by us. In the witchweed eradication program here, we had detection surveys, delimiting surveys, and appraisal surveys. We used horses, we used platforms with jeeps, we walked. In the case of Lake Waccamaw, we did a whole lake sonar survey to map the lake bottom to verify where we thought it was. And it's pretty much where the rake toss with the garden rake on the end of a hose of a rope. That's where we thought it was. Well, that's what the sonar told us. If you're in large land units like national parks or refuges, there are a number of survey methods that you can learn about, especially from the folks out west at Utah State University who had developed the wildland weed survey methods. And once you find information, that you gather information from the field, collect your data, we're suggesting you put it in an online database, and in your case, it'll probably go into iPane. Well, iPane now is managed in terms of information. The information goes into the University of Georgia EdMaps database. So you can do this through an online field data entry form on your computer, or you can do it through a iPhone or an Android phone app. These phone apps are the neatest thing I have seen. I have a phone like this, and the one I've been using for the past several months is I've Got One, which was actually developed to report plants and animals in Florida. The one that I'm using now is the Southeastern Early Detection Network for this area. They've developed one for Mid-Atlantic Early Detection Network, and of course they have one for you to report on things in New England. These smart tools make it practical to report your information standing right there in the middle of a patch of Oriental bittersweet. So then when you get your information into the database, Invasive Plant Control has a number of smart tools which you can use to manage your data, to give you control recommendations, and to actually help guide you through step-by-step of developing early detection capacity as we're talking about today. Once you find something you think is a problem, this is crested floating hard, and you need to report it to the State Department of Agriculture and the Department of Natural Resources in the case of aquatic weeds. If it's a confirmed infestation of a federal or state noxious weed like Cogon grass, which we found here in North Carolina last May, then you need to actually call USDA APHIS and your Department of Agriculture for sure. So what happened was, when we heard about this from a county agent down here in Pender County, Rick Iverson called us all together that day and said, be here tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And so they started an eradication program the next day. It's like only a half an acre. But this was the first time we had ever found Cogon grass in North Carolina. And because somebody called us about it, we were able to jump on it. And it'll take 2 or 3 years, but it'll be history. And the map will still be blank in terms of Cogon grass in the southeast for Cogon grass. Then you need to do an assessment, and once you find something, to determine an assessment, a need for an assessment. If it is a suspected, if it's a species that's already regulated, you don't need to do an assessment. If it's giant salvinia, you just need to go get rid of it. If it's a suspected new invasive species, I suggest you first look at the Global Compendium of Weeds by Rod Randall. This is this book lists 33,759 species of weeds worldwide, and he keeps adding to it all the time. About 10 years ago, when he first published this book, the hard copy, which I show right here, it has 22,000 species in it, but the database now has 33,000 species in it. You can actually download a copy of this for yourself, free. If you go to just type in Global Compendium of Weeds on the Google search, and you can find Rod's website with the Western Australia Department of Ag, and download a copy for yourself. You can do rapid assessments if it's something you think is, you're wondering if whether you should deal with this problem on your land, and this might apply to things that are widespread like Oriental bittersweet. If it was something that you just weren't sure whether it might not be regulated, but maybe it's new for you, we have a set of recommendations for doing a general rapid assessment. Or you can use some of the tools like they have with USDA APHIS, which I used in 2006 to do an assessment of beech vitex, in which it turned out to be ranked pretty high as an invasive species, but it was never listed as a federal noxious weed, because the law says you can only regulate federal noxious weeds if they're of foreign origin. Well, there's a book that says beech vitex is native to Hawaii. Well, I could understand that if it were not also native to Korea. I just myself have a hard time understanding why somebody could say a plant is native to Hawaii and native to Korea at the same time, because there's 4,600 miles of water, of ocean in between them. Anyway, so the long story is we did not regulate beech vitex. It was regulated in North Carolina, and also in Virginia it's regulated in some counties, but not in South Carolina, because the plant nursery industry protested to the State Department of Agriculture and said, we sell this plant up in Columbia, up in the mountains in Greenville, so you're just interfering with free trade. So they listened and they wouldn't regulate it. They said the people down at the beach can deal with it. So we actually have town and county ordinances down along the beach here in South Carolina to regulate the use and planting of beech vitex, which works okay. you also can use the Australian Weed Risk Assessment System, which I really like. I put that in the wrong place. Excuse me. This is the Carolinas Beach Vitex Task Force that we established in 2003 as a response to folks, sea turtle volunteers, being concerned about this. Okay, if you're interested in the other system that I really like, it's the Australian Quarantine Inspection System. That is very similar to the one APHIS had. It's just simpler. There's 49 questions, and you answer each of the questions, and if you get a score higher than a 6, you reject it. So I like both of the systems. APHIS has actually updated their system. I think it probably looks more like the Australian system now. So the next thing you need to do after you do an assessment and you determine that you should take action, I want you to think about how you will do that. You're now to the point of saying, okay, we're going to eradicate this. How do we get it organized? Well, you can do like they did with the Witchweed Eradication Program. That's a single agency-led program. Generally, regulated species are done like this, and that's what we call EDRR 1.0. You can also do it as an interagency task force, generally non-cropland species. This is what we did for the Beach Vitex Task Force and also for the Giant Salvinia Task Force when we eradicated it from about 5 spots here in North Carolina from 2002 up to last year. So that's EDRR 2.0. EDRR 2.0 would also be what you're involved in up there, and that would be cooperative weed management areas, or SISMAs, geographic-based systems. An example of that would be the South Fork Weed Management Area in Park County, Wyoming. And this is Bob Parsons, who's the weed supervisor in Park County, with a specimen of Dyer's woad. Now, what he did was eradicate this from Park County, Wyoming, which is where Yellowstone National Park is. So Bob has embraced and adopted the idea of EDRR on the land that he owns and manages. In his case, it is Park County. He can't help what the people in the next county do, and this thing is actually a problem in Utah as well. It's just that it's too widespread in Utah to eradicate it from Utah as a state. But you could go down to the county level, and I bet you could eradicate it from some counties in Utah. So what we're trying to do is to take a nested approach to this. So you take care of what you can, and if everybody did that, we wouldn't have near as many problems as we do, or we will have. And then we have local weed eradication projects like the Hydrilla Task Force that we are establishing here at Lake Waccamaw. So here's some ideas for you when you decide to do this. And this is based on experience with the Witchweed Eradication Program and all these other weed eradication programs around the country, because if you're going to learn these things on your own, every one of these, if you just jot them down, I think they'll really help you. When you go to do this, make sure everybody that has some stake in it is involved. In the case of the Witchweed Eradication Program, the farmers never had to do a single thing. And so there's no reason for the program to ever end. I mean, they like having the government contractors come out and kill their weeds. And oh, by the way, will you take care of some of my other weeds while you're out there? Of course you will. Next thing is ask some hard questions. Is there anything going to keep you from meeting your goal? And this is exactly what happened with the Goat Shrew Eradication Program, in which we placed $150,000 a year for 15 years to eradicate this legume from Cache County, Utah, up there in the very northern corner of Utah. And then in 1996, when the congressional earmark was lifted, there was really nobody there to go to bat for Jack Evans, who was the professor at Utah State, who did such a great job for all those years developing methods to eradicate this plant. But I got to tell you, though, even that being said, they should have asked one more question, which they didn't at the time, and that was, how long do the seeds last in the soil? In the case of witchweed, we're able to use ethylene in the soil, to inject it in the soil, to do suicidal germination of 99% of the seeds in the soil. That's what made the witchweed eradication program practical. It did cost a lot of money over 55 years, $250 million, which I'll give you a rationale if you'll come back to listen at 12 o'clock. I'll tell you why it's worth it. But anyway, in the case with goat shrew, they didn't ask that single question. So the question is, would anybody even be around in 50 years to finish this program? So here we are 55 years later, and almost everybody who started the witchweed eradication program is gone. Fortunately, it is such a threat to the national corn crop that the USDA and the states of North Carolina and South Carolina have carried on with the program, and we're near the end. We actually have about 1,500 acres left infested out of 432,000 acres we started with. What you need to do is eliminate satellite infestations. First, stop further seed reproduction. Eliminate the seed bank in the soil, as I said we have done with ethylene through the witchweed eradication program. Make sure you don't move things out of the eradication zone, and by all means clean the equipment. Here's a picture of witchweed seeds, what we were dealing with. Here's human hair, here's witchweed seeds. So you can have it under your fingernails and it just looks like dirt, this little dust. So it's very difficult to deal with. Now, to finish up here, Steve, I want to just show you just one more thing. Where we are right now with Lake Waccamaw, right here in southeastern North Carolina, we have this 9,000-acre lake that everybody loves. It is the destination for our part of North Carolina. If you want to go someplace for a nice weekend, or to sail or boat or fish, come to Lake Waccamaw. But now we have this plant that if we don't deal with it, here it is. If we don't deal with it, it's going to look like this picture from South Florida, literally. This lake is no more than 11 feet deep, which means it would grow anywhere in this lake, and the cost, because we can't use grass carp, is going to be $450,000 a year. So we're having meetings this week and next week to figure out where's that money coming from, because the state thinks they have found $200,000 to go into this, to rationalize why they would spend it here as opposed to some other lake in North Carolina. And so they've got to go to bat and testify. It's going to be interesting when they say, yes, put the money in that lake and not some lake up near Charlotte. $450,000 a year. Just think about how this might affect you if someplace that you manage up there suddenly is faced with what we're faced here. This is a real problem. I didn't make this up. But here's the really scary part. When NC State does their presentations, here's what you see next. It's $450,000 this year. In 5 years, it's going to cover 2/3 of the lake. And I don't even know, nobody even has a clue what it would cost to control that. So basically, you just turn it into a swamp. And then all the homes and everything, it would just be ruined as a wonderful place here in southeastern North Carolina. So anyway, the summary of the 7 steps are: get organized, put more eyes on the ground, look around, tell somebody, assess the problem, and take action. And you can look at all of our webinars. If you want the details of all of these 7 steps, our webinars that we have recorded give you more details about it, including the one today at noon. We'll finish up that series to talk about details of these eradication programs that